Laughter echoed through the learning halls of Harmony's Rest, a sound that had become as common as the gentle hum of the station's life support systems. Reed watched from the observation deck as 12-year-old Amy showed a group of Florian cubs how to build a simple robot from spare parts. The bear-like aliens, standing barely 3 feet tall with soft brown fur and curious black eyes, fumbled with tiny screwdrivers using their small paws. "No, no, Pip," Amy giggled, guiding the youngest cub's paws to the correct circuit board. "The blue wire goes there, not the red one. You'll make it spin backwards." Pip's ears twitched with embarrassment, but his enthusiasm never dimmed. Like all Florians, he possessed an insatiable curiosity about the universe around him. His species had evolved on a peaceful world where cooperation and learning were the highest virtues. They had never known war, never experienced the darkness that could lurk in other species' hearts. The cultural exchange program had been running for 8 months now. 20 human children between ages 10 and 15 lived aboard the station, learning Florian philosophy and meditation techniques. In return, they taught basic engineering, mathematics, and what humans called practical problem solving. The Florian cubs absorbed every lesson with wonder, while their own teachings helped the human children develop patience and inner peace. Reed moved away from the window and walked through the station's corridors. The facility itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Built in neutral space between human and Florian territories, it represented the best of what the galaxy could achieve when species worked together. Smooth walls curved gracefully, following Florian architectural preferences, while hidden access panels and efficient layouts reflected human practicality. Dr. Mills approached from the medical bay, his daily health reports in hand. "Both groups are thriving," he said with satisfaction. "The human children's stress levels are lower than we've ever recorded. The Florian cubs are developing cognitive abilities faster than their home-world averages. This program is exceeding every expectation." "Good to hear," Reed replied, though she kept scanning the corridor displays. Recent intelligence reports from the Outer Rim had been troubling. The Ravager Coalition had been expanding their territory through intimidation and force. They targeted weaker species, enslaving populations and strip-mining worlds. So far, they had avoided direct confrontation with major powers like humanity or the Florian Commonwealth, but their activities were becoming bolder. In the main classroom, 16-year-old Dan was teaching a group of older cubs about computer programming. His patient voice carried through the open doorway. "Think of code like a recipe," he explained. "Each line tells the computer exactly what to do, step by step. If you mess up one ingredient, the whole dish goes wrong." Moss, a particularly bright cub with gray-streaked fur, raised a small paw. "But what if the computer doesn't understand the recipe? What if it makes mistakes?" "Computers don't make mistakes," Dan laughed. "People do. The computer will always follow your instructions exactly, even if those instructions are wrong. That's why we have to be very careful about what we tell it to do." This was the kind of interaction that made the program so valuable. The human children learned to explain complex concepts in simple terms, while the Florian cubs discovered new ways of thinking about problems. Both species benefited from the exchange, developing deeper understanding not just of technology or philosophy, but of each other. Reed continued her rounds, checking on various activities throughout the station. In the workshop area, 10-year-old Beth was helping cubs build solar collectors from recycled materials. The art studio buzzed with creative energy as human and Florian children worked together on a massive mural depicting both their homeworlds. Even the dining hall had become a learning space, with cubs teaching humans about Florian cuisine, while learning human cooking techniques in return. The harmony was so complete, so natural, that it seemed impossible anything could disturb it. That peaceful illusion shattered when Operator Lee's voice crackled over the communications system. "Read to the command center immediately. We have multiple contacts approaching at high speed." Reed ran through the corridors, her emergency training taking over. The command center overlooked the station's docking bays and housed all critical systems. Lee stood at the sensor array, his face pale with concern. 8 ships, unknown configuration, he reported. They appeared at the edge of sensor range 15 minutes ago. moving fast, heading directly for us. IFF signals? None. They're not responding to hails. Reed studied the sensor data. The approaching vessels were sleek, predatory-looking craft, built for speed and firepower rather than exploration or trade. Their energy signatures matched nothing in the database, but their aggressive formation left little doubt about their intentions. Alert status yellow, Reed ordered. Recall all children to the safe zones immediately. Throughout the station, gentle chimes began sounding. It was a drill the children had practiced many times, though they had never expected to use it for real. Human and Flurian children alike moved quickly but calmly toward the reinforced sections of the station. Amy found Pip cowering near the robot they had been building. His small body trembled with fear as his species' natural empathy picked up on the tension filling the station. "It's okay," she whispered, taking his paw in her hand. "We practiced this, remember? We just need to go to the safe room and wait." But as the unknown ships closed distance, Reed realized that no safe room would be enough. These weren't pirates looking for cargo or raiders seeking quick profit. The formation, the approach vector, the complete communication blackout, everything pointed to a coordinated military operation. The ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel just outside the station's defensive perimeter. Up close, their hulls displayed the jagged insignia of the Ravager Coalition. Reed's blood ran cold as she recognized the design from intelligence briefings. "This is Captain Reed of Harmony's Rest," she broadcast on all frequencies. "You are approaching a neutral diplomatic facility. State your intentions immediately." The reply came not as words but as action. Bright energy beams lanced out from the lead ship, precisely targeting the station's communication arrays and defensive systems. Not enough to cause structural damage, but sufficient to cripple their ability to call for help or resist. Emergency lights bathed the command center in red as systems went offline one by one. Through the viewports, Reed could see smaller craft, launching from the Ravager ships, boarding pods designed to breach station hulls and disgorge troops. "Initiate Emergency Protocol 7, Reed commanded, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her heart. "Send the distress beacon while we still can." Lee's fingers flew over his controls, encoding a priority message with their location, situation, and attacker identification. The quantum transmitter fired the signal into deep space just seconds before enemy jamming enveloped the station. The first boarding pod struck the station with a metallic clang that echoed through the corridors. Then another, and another. In the safe rooms, human children held Flurian cubs close as the sounds of cutting tools and explosions grew louder. They had practiced emergency procedures, but nothing had prepared them for the reality of hostile forces breaching their peaceful sanctuary. Reed activated the internal communications one last time. "All civilian personnel remain in secure locations. Do not resist. Repeat, do not resist." The command center doors exploded inward, and armored figures poured through the opening. The Ravager soldiers were a mix of species, all bound together by their allegiance to conquest and cruelty. Their leader, distinguished by elaborate armor decorations, surveyed the humans with cold satisfaction. "I am Warlord Grix," he announced, in accented galactic standard. "This station is now under Coalition control. You will surrender all weapons and submit to processing." Reed stepped forward, her hands raised but her spine straight. "These are civilians, including children. They pose no threat to you." Grix's alien features twisted in what might have been amusement. "Children are exactly what we need. Young minds are so much easier to reshape." The implications of his words hit Reed like a physical blow. But before she could respond, more soldiers herded the captured adults toward the detention areas. Throughout the station, the sounds of weeping and fear replaced the laughter that had filled these halls just hours before. As Reed was led away, she caught a glimpse through a viewport of the Coalition ships positioning themselves around Harmony's Rest. The Ravagers had come prepared for a long occupation, not a quick raid. But they had made one critical error in their planning. They had taken human children hostage, and somewhere in the depths of space, a quantum signal carrying news of that mistake was racing toward Earth at the speed of light. The quantum signal reached Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Station at exactly 14:27 GMT. Technician Foster was reviewing routine traffic reports when the priority alert began flashing on her screen. The message header made her blood freeze. Hostile takeover. Children in danger. Immediate assistance required. Within minutes, the distress call had been forwarded to the highest levels of human government. President Walsh interrupted a cabinet meeting to receive the briefing personally. The room fell silent as intelligence officers displayed the sparse details available. Harmony's rest station captured, 20 human children, and dozens of Florian cubs taken hostage by Ravager Coalition forces. Options? Walsh asked, though her tone suggested she had already made her decision. General Hayes pulled up tactical displays. The Ravager Coalition controls 12 star systems in the Outer Rim. They operate from heavily fortified worlds with substantial military assets. Our nearest battle group is 6 days away from the station. The Galactic Council is calling for diplomatic intervention, added Secretary of State Brooks. They want to establish a negotiating committee, work through proper channels. The Zenthari ambassador specifically warned against any military response that might escalate the situation. Walsh's expression hardened. Every person in the room understood the unspoken reality. The galaxy's elder races preferred slow, careful negotiations that could drag on for months or years. They had evolved past what they considered humanity's primitive emotional responses. They had never had their children threatened. "Patch me through to Admiral Cross," Walsh ordered. The communication screen flickered to life, showing the weathered face of humanity's most decorated military commander. Behind him, the bridge of the dreadnought Unbroken buzzed with activity. "Admiral, you've seen the reports?" "Yes, Madam President, we're already moving." Walsh felt a grim satisfaction at those words. Cross was a man who understood that some situations required action, not discussion. "What do you need?" "Everything," Cross replied without hesitation. "Full mobilization. Every ship, every asset. Complete operational freedom. The Ravagers have made this personal." Within hours, humanity began to move with a speed and coordination that shocked their galactic neighbors. The first wave consisted of fast attack ships and reconnaissance vessels, racing toward Ravager space to establish surveillance and intelligence-gathering operations. But it was the second wave that caused real alarm throughout the galaxy. Deep, in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, hidden shipyards that most aliens didn't know existed came fully online. Massive construction platforms began producing vessels at an impossible rate, their automated systems working around the clock. Ships that had been theoretical designs just days before began taking physical form, equipped with weapons that pushed the boundaries of galactic warfare conventions. Dr. Vale received the summons while working in her xenobiology lab. As Earth's leading expert on alien psychology and warfare, her insights would be crucial in the coming conflict. She found herself in a secure briefing room filled with military officers, intelligence analysts, and government officials. "The Ravagers specialize in psychological warfare," she explained to the assembled group. "They conquer through fear and intimidation, using hostages and terror tactics to break enemy morale. They expect their opponents to negotiate, to compromise, to show restraint." "What's their greatest weakness?" Admiral Cross asked via secure. Link Vale's expression grew cold. "They've never fought humanity. They don't understand what they've triggered." Across human space, reserve fleets began moving from hidden bases. Ships emerged from deep space patrol routes, abandoning their posts to converge on Earth's growing armada. Most shocking of all, vessels that had been listed as decommissioned or in storage suddenly appeared in active service, their crews materializing as if from nowhere. The galaxy's intelligence network struggled to track the movement. How many ships did humanity actually possess? Where were they all coming from? The numbers simply didn't match any previous estimates of human military capability. On the diplomatic front, humanity's response was equally unprecedented. Ambassador Chen addressed the Galactic Council with barely contained fury. her usual diplomatic polish replaced by raw emotion. "My fellow representatives," she began, her voice echoing through the council chambers. "For 300 years this body has prided itself on finding peaceful solutions to conflict. We have negotiated treaties, mediated disputes, and prevented countless wars through dialogue and compromise." The assembled aliens nodded approval, expecting another plea for diplomatic intervention. But today, that ends. Chen continued, her tone growing harder. "Today you will learn why humans are different, why we do not negotiate when our children are threatened, why some lines once crossed can never be uncrossed." The Zenthari ambassador rose to speak, his tall, graceful form radiating the condescending patience his species was known for. "Ambassador Chen, surely you do not mean to abandon the principles of civilized discourse that bind our alliance together. Violence only breeds more violence. The proper response is measured negotiation." Chen turned to face him directly, and something in her eyes made several alien representatives step backward. "Ambassador, your species has never had children. You reproduce through spore colonies, impersonal and automatic. The Florians have never known violence, their young developing in perfect safety. Even the warrior races like the Kreks fight only for territory and resources." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Humans are different. We carry our young within our bodies, bond with them before they are even born. We sacrifice everything for their safety, their future, their dreams. And when something threatens our children, we do not become diplomatic. We do not become reasonable. We become something else entirely." The council chamber fell silent. Many of the elder races had watched humanity's rise with mixture of curiosity and concern, noting their emotional volatility and aggressive tendencies. But they had always assumed these were weaknesses to be controlled, primitive responses that would fade with maturity. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Reports began filtering in from across the galaxy. Human commercial vessels in Ravager-controlled space were abandoning their cargo and racing for friendly territory. Human diplomatic missions were being evacuated from neutral worlds. Most ominously, human corporations with facilities near the conflict zone began moving their assets with military precision. The Ravager Coalition, initially confident in their fortress worlds and slave armies, started receiving intelligence reports that made their leaders question their decision. Human ships were appearing in systems where they had never been seen before. Communication intercepts suggested a level of military coordination that seemed impossible for what the galaxy considered a relatively young and emotional species. Supreme Commander Vorth, leader of the coalition, dismissed the early reports as exaggeration. Humans were soft, he reasoned. They cared too much about individual lives to wage true war. Their emotional attachments would make them cautious, predictable, vulnerable to the very hostage tactics that had served the coalition so well against other species. But as reports continued to arrive, doubt began creeping into his certainty. The human fleet was not moving like any force he had encountered before. There were no preliminary negotiations, no posturing, no attempts at intimidation. They were simply coming, with a speed and determination that suggested only one possible outcome. On Harmony's rest station, the hostages had been separated into different detention areas. The human children were kept together in one section, while the Florian cubs were held in another. The separation was deliberate, designed to increase anxiety and prevent the two groups from comforting each other. But the Ravagers had underestimated the bonds that had formed during those 8 months of cultural exchange. 16-year-old Dan had managed to maintain communication with some of the cubs by tapping coded messages through the walls. The simple rhythm patterns he had taught them during computer programming lessons now carried messages of hope and resistance. Amy, the 12-year-old, who had been teaching Pip about robotics, spent hours whispering encouragement to the younger human children. "Don't worry," she told them, her voice steady despite her own fear. "Help is coming. Humans never leave their people behind." The Florian cubs, despite their species' pacifist nature, showed remarkable courage in captivity. When Ravager guards, tried to separate the youngest cubs from the older ones. Pip stepped forward with all the bravery his small frame could muster. "We stay together," he said in his carefully learned English. "That's what humans taught us. We protect each other." The guard struck him down with casual cruelty, but Pip's act of defiance had been seen by both human and Flurian prisoners. Word spread through the detention areas. The children were not broken, not beaten, not giving up hope. Unknown to their captors, that hope was well-founded. Deep in space, the largest fleet in human history was approaching with single-minded purpose. Admiral Cross stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching tactical displays that showed the positions of over 3,000 human vessels. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving updates from our intelligence assets in Ravager space. The hostages are confirmed alive and being held on the station." Cross nodded grimly. "And the Ravager response to our approach?" "They're treating it as a bluff, sir. Warlord Grix has sent several messages demanding our withdrawal. He's threatening to execute prisoners if we don't comply." The bridge fell silent. Everyone present understood the terrible calculation they faced. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and 20 human children and dozens of innocent alien cubs would die. But Cross had not earned his reputation by backing down from impossible situations. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Operation Iron Guardian is now active. All units are to prepare for immediate engagement upon my command." Throughout human space, the message was received and understood. The time for diplomacy had ended. The time for negotiation had passed. The galaxy was about to witness something it had never seen before: humanity at war for its children, and nothing would ever be the same. Warlord Grix stood in the command center of Harmony's rest station, watching long-range sensors track the approaching human fleet. His scarred features showed no concern as his officers reported increasing numbers of enemy vessels. The Coalition had faced larger fleets before, had broken stronger enemies through superior tactics and ruthless determination. "Impressive display," he told his second-in-command, a hulking warrior named Thok. "The humans are trying to intimidate us with numbers. They still don't understand how warfare truly works." Thok's multiple eyes blinked in agreement. Their emotional attachment to the young ones makes them predictable. When we begin executing prisoners, they will withdraw rather than risk casualties. Grix activated the station's communication array, broadcasting on all frequencies. He wanted every ship in the human fleet to hear his words clearly. "Human commanders," he began, his voice carrying the arrogance of countless victories. "You approach Coalition territory in violation of galactic law. Your young are now property of the Coalition, as are the alien cubs. You have 24 hours to withdraw all forces and surrender 3 of your colony worlds as payment for this transgression. Failure to comply will result in the immediate execution of all prisoners." To emphasize his seriousness, Grix ordered his soldiers to bring one of the Flurian adults to the station's main viewing port. The elderly teacher named Sage had been trying to comfort the cubs since the capture, using his natural empathy to ease their fear. The execution was broadcast live to the human fleet. The response from humanity was not what Grix expected. Instead of desperate negotiations or threats, the human communications went completely silent. No pleas for mercy, no counteroffers, no attempts at bargaining. The vast fleet simply continued its steady approach, now moving with even greater purpose. On Earth, President Walsh watched the brutal execution with hands clenched into fists. Around her, the emergency council members stared at the screens in horrified silence. The casual cruelty of the act, the deliberate choice to kill an innocent educator in front of children, revealed the true nature of their enemy. "Madam President," General Hayes said quietly, "the Galactic Council is demanding we stand down. They claim our military buildup threatens galactic stability. Several major powers are threatening sanctions if we proceed." Walsh turned away from the screen, her decision crystallizing in that moment. "General, activate the Broken Arrow Protocol. Full military authorization, no restrictions, no rules of engagement limitations." The room fell silent. Broken Arrow was humanity's most classified military doctrine, designed for situations where the very survival of human civilization was at stake. It had never been used, never even been seriously considered, until now. "Ma'am," Secretary Brooks said carefully, "the galaxy will never forgive us. The diplomatic consequences—" "Let them hate us," Walsh replied with cold finality. "Let them fear us. Let them never, ever forget what happens when someone takes our children." The authorization codes went out immediately. Across human space, military commanders who had spent decades wondering if they would ever receive such orders began implementing protocols that had existed only in theory. Admiral Cross received the Broken Arrow confirmation while studying tactical displays on his flagship's bridge. Around him, his officers watched displays showing Ravager fleet positions, defensive installations, and population centers. The intelligence was remarkably detailed, gathered by assets the Coalition never knew existed. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we have complete mapping of all Coalition military assets. Fortress worlds, supply lines, command structures, civilian populations, everything." Cross nodded. Broken Arrow protocols required perfect intelligence before implementation. Humanity had been watching the Ravagers for longer than anyone knew, preparing for the possibility that eventually their paths would cross in violence. Fleet status: 3,417 vessels now in position, including assets the enemy has not yet detected. Cross allowed himself a grim smile. The Ravagers thought they were facing the human fleet. They had no idea. They were about to confront the full military might of humanity, accumulated over centuries of careful preparation and technological development. On Harmony's rest station, the execution of Sage had sent shockwaves through both human and Flurian prisoners. The children saw the casual cruelty their captors were capable of, but instead of breaking their spirit, it seemed to strengthen their resolve. 16-year-old Dan had managed to establish communication with several of the older Flurian cubs through their improvised code system. The gentle aliens had never experienced violence before, but they were learning quickly about resistance and courage from their human friends. "Remember what we practiced," Dan tapped against the wall, using the rhythm patterns from their programming lessons. "Stay strong. Help comes." From the other side came Pip's response, his small paws creating the careful rhythm that meant understand and agree. The human children had organized themselves as best they could in captivity. The older ones took care of the younger, sharing what little food they received and keeping everyone's spirits up with whispered stories and quiet songs. They had transformed their detention area into a small community of mutual support. Amy had become the unofficial leader of the younger children, her natural compassion and quick thinking making her a focal point for hope. When 10-year-old Beth started crying after seeing Sage's execution, Amy held her close and whispered fiercely, "They can hurt us, but they can't make us give up. That's what makes us human." The Ravager guards found the prisoners' resilience puzzling and frustrating. Most species broke quickly under psychological pressure, becoming compliant and hopeless within days. These human children and alien cubs seemed to grow stronger together, their bonds deepening rather than breaking under stress. Warlord Grix, reviewing security reports in his command center, frowned at the patterns he saw. "The prisoners are not responding as expected," he told Thok. "Increase the pressure. Separate them further. Make sure they understand their helplessness." But as the hours passed and the human fleet drew closer, it became clear that the pressure was affecting the captors more than their prisoners. Ravager soldiers, veteran conquerors who had broken dozens of worlds, found themselves disturbed by the steady courage of children who should have been terrified into submission. The final phase of the human approach began when the 24-hour deadline expired. Instead of negotiations or surrender, Admiral Cross broadcast a single message to all Ravager forces. "This is Admiral Cross of the Terran Defense Fleet. You have murdered an innocent civilian and continue to hold children hostage. Your actions have forfeited any claim to mercy or quarter. Surrender immediately and release all prisoners or face total destruction." Grix laughed when he heard the transmission. Total destruction? from a species that agonizes over individual casualties? Their emotional weaknesses make them predictable. He was about to learn just how wrong that assessment was. The first sign of humanity's true capabilities came not as weapon fire or fleet movements, but as darkness. Across 6 star systems, Ravager communication networks, power grids, and computer systems simply stopped working. The electromagnetic pulse that caused the blackout was so precisely calibrated that it disabled military assets while leaving life support systems intact. The precision was terrifying. This was not random destruction, but surgical strikes that demonstrated complete understanding of Ravager technology and infrastructure. Every critical system was targeted, every backup was accounted for, every redundancy was neutralized. In the sudden communication blackout, Ravager commanders found themselves isolated, unable to coordinate responses or call for assistance. Their fortress worlds, supposedly impregnable, were effectively blind and deaf. "Impossible," Grix whispered, watching his own systems flicker and fail around him. "How do they know our frequencies, our encryption, our system vulnerabilities?" The answer came from intelligence reports that would have been impossible to transmit, even if the communication networks were functioning. Human infiltration of Ravager space had been far more complete than anyone suspected. For years, human agents had been embedded in coalition territory, gathering information and preparing for exactly this scenario. When the pulse effects faded and emergency systems came back online, Ravager forces found themselves facing a nightmare scenario. Human ships were everywhere, appearing in formations that should have been impossible to coordinate without advanced warning. They had somehow positioned massive fleets in perfect ambush positions without being detected. The human vessels did not immediately attack. Instead, they began a psychological campaign that was far more effective than any weapon. Ravager ships would find themselves suddenly surrounded, completely helpless, only to have the human vessels vanish again without firing a shot. The message was clear. Humanity could destroy any Ravager force at will. They were choosing not to, for now. On board his flagship, Supreme Commander Vorth received scattered reports from across Coalition space. Every single military asset was compromised. Every stronghold was surrounded. Every escape route was blocked. The humans had not just brought a fleet to the battle. They had brought an entire war machine that had been preparing for this moment for longer than anyone could have imagined. "How many ships do they actually have?" he demanded of his intelligence officers. "Unknown, sir. Our estimates were clearly inadequate. They seem to have hidden capabilities far beyond anything we detected." Vorth stared at the tactical displays, beginning to understand the magnitude of his error. The Ravager Coalition had built their power through careful calculation, targeting species that could not effectively resist their tactics. They avoided fights they could not win, chose victims who could not fight back. They had chosen their victims very, very poorly this time. Back on Harmony's rest station, the children could sense that something fundamental had changed. The Ravager guards were nervous, speaking in hushed tones about equipment failures and communication breakdowns. Even without knowing the details, the prisoners could feel that the tide was turning. Dan managed to tap out a message to the Florian cubs. "Our people are here. Soon, we go home." The response came back immediately, Pip's small paws creating the rhythm that meant joy and hope. As the human fleet moved into final positions around the station, Admiral Cross prepared to give the order that would determine whether this ended in rescue or tragedy. The Ravagers still held the children, and desperate enemies were capable of desperate acts. But humanity had learned something about itself in the past few days. When pushed to the absolute limit, when their most precious treasures were threatened, they did not become emotional or irrational. They became absolutely terrifying. The galaxy was about to witness the birth of a legend, and the end of the Ravager Coalition's reign of terror. The children would be going home, and nothing in the universe would be allowed to stand in the way of that outcome. Inside the detention areas of Harmony's rest station, the children could hear strange sounds echoing through the metal walls. Not the harsh voices of Ravager guards, or the clang of boots on deck plates, but something else entirely. Soft whispers in the ventilation systems, the gentle hiss of airlocks cycling, sounds that seemed almost like ghosts moving through the station. Amy pressed her ear against the wall, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. The older human, children had noticed it too. Their captors were becoming increasingly nervous, checking their weapons more frequently and speaking in worried clusters. Something was happening that the Ravagers did not understand or control. Dan had maintained his coded communication with the Flurian cubs throughout the day. The rhythm patterns they shared told a story of hope growing stronger. Even young Pip, barely 3 feet tall and naturally gentle, was tapping messages of encouragement to his human friends. The species barrier meant nothing now. They were all just children facing danger together. "Listen," Amy whispered to the younger ones huddled around her. "Do you hear that humming sound? It's getting closer." The sound was barely noticeable, like electricity running through the walls themselves, but it was growing stronger, more focused, as if the station's own systems were slowly awakening under new control. 3 decks above them, Captain Bell moved through the station's maintenance shafts with the silent precision of a hunting cat. Her stealth suit bent light around her form, making her effectively invisible to normal sensors. Behind her, a team of 12 human special forces operators followed in perfect synchronization. They were not the first humans to board Harmony's Rest. For the past 6 hours, human infiltration teams had been slipping aboard the station using technology that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Molecular disruptors allowed them to phase through solid walls. Adaptive camouflage made them blend seamlessly with their surroundings. Neural dampeners prevented even psychic species from detecting their presence. Bell paused at a junction, consulting the detailed station schematics that human intelligence had somehow acquired. Every corridor, every room, every hidden passage was mapped with perfect accuracy. The Ravagers thought they controlled this facility, but humans had been preparing for this operation since the moment the distress signal was received. Team 2 report status, Bell whispered into her throat microphone. "Prison levels secured," came the quiet response. "Guards neutralized, no casualties among friendlies. Ready for extraction on your mark." Team 3, Communications Center, is ours. All outgoing transmissions blocked. The Ravagers can't call for help. Bell smiled grimly. The operation was proceeding exactly as planned. The human teams had not killed a single enemy. They had simply made them disappear. Ravager guards were finding themselves alone in corridors they thought were secure. Their companions vanished without trace or sound. In the station's command center, Warlord Grick stared at status displays that made no sense. Half his troops had stopped reporting in, but there were no signs of battle, no weapons fire, no explosions. His soldiers were simply gone. "Sir," one of his remaining officers reported, "we've lost contact with levels 7 through 12, also the communication array and the engine room." "Impossible," Grix snarled. "Send security teams to investigate." But the security teams never arrived at their destinations. They would set out from the command center, march confidently down familiar corridors, and then silence. No screams, no sounds of struggle, just empty hallways where armed warriors had walked moments before. Thok, Grix's massive second-in-command, gripped his weapon tighter. "The humans are here," he growled. "Somehow, they're inside the station." "A few infiltrators cannot defeat an entire garrison," Grix replied, but his confidence was wavering. The systematic disappearance of his forces suggested capabilities far beyond normal special operations. Meanwhile, Captain Bell's team had reached the primary detention area. Through the reinforced walls they could hear children's voices, human and alien alike, speaking in quiet tones. The sound filled Bell with cold determination. These were not military targets or strategic assets. These were children who should have been safe, learning and playing instead of cowering in makeshift prisons. Thermal imaging confirms 23 human children and 41 Flurian cubs, her tactical officer reported. 6 guards inside the detention area. Standard suppression weapons. Bell nodded. "Remember the mission parameters. The children asked us not to leave anyone behind. We extract everyone, Human, Florian, and any other prisoners we find. It was true. Intercepted communications from inside the detention areas had revealed the children's remarkable request. When rescue teams had asked for priority extraction targets, 16-year-old Dan had somehow managed to send back a message. All of us or none of us. That's what being human means. The rescue became something larger than anyone had planned. Throughout the station, human teams began freeing not just the children, but hundreds of other prisoners from dozens of species, slave laborers, political prisoners, captured civilians. All the forgotten victims of Ravager expansion found themselves facing human soldiers who refused to leave anyone in chains. "This is Extraction Team 4, came a report over Bell's communicator. "We've found the holding pens for forced laborers. Over 300 individuals from 15 different species. They're all coming with us." The simple rescue mission was transforming into the liberation of an entire sector's worth of suffering. Bell's team moved into position outside the children's detention area. The 6 guards inside were alert but confused, trying to understand why their communication with the command center had been cut off. They had no idea that human soldiers were already inside their perimeter, already controlling every aspect of the situation. The breach was so fast and precise that the guards never had a chance to threaten their prisoners. Stun weapons dropped, them unconscious in seconds, while human medics immediately began checking on the children's health and safety. Amy looked up as the detention area door opened, revealing figures in strange armor that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. For a moment, she was afraid these might be different captors. Then one of them removed her helmet, revealing a human face marked by determination and compassion. "Hello there," Captain Bell said gently. "My name is Bell. We're here to take you home." The reaction from the children was immediate and overwhelming. Human kids rushed toward their rescuers while Florian cubs chittered with joy and relief. But Amy stepped forward, her young face showing remarkable composure. "Captain Bell," she said formally, "we can't leave the other prisoners behind. There are hundreds of people on this station who need help too." Bell knelt down to Amy's eye level, struck by the girl's courage and compassion even after days of captivity. "Don't worry, Amy. We're taking everyone. Every single person who wants to be free." The evacuation began immediately, but it was unlike anything the human rescue teams had expected. The children, instead of simply fleeing to safety, insisted on helping with the broader liberation effort. Human kids who had spent months learning Florian philosophy used their knowledge to comfort traumatized alien prisoners. Florian cubs, despite their species' peaceful nature, showed remarkable bravery in guiding rescue teams to other detention areas. Young Dan had somehow memorized the station's layout during their captivity, providing crucial intelligence about hidden prison sections that even human surveillance had missed. Pip, the smallest of the Florian cubs, used his species' natural empathy to identify prisoners who were too traumatized to respond to rescuers. As the liberation expanded, human teams found themselves in an impossible situation. They had come, prepared to extract 20 children, and had instead uncovered a network of suffering that stretched across multiple star systems. Every freed prisoner provided information about other Ravager facilities, other victims, other atrocities that demanded justice. Bell received updated orders from Admiral Cross. "Captain, new mission parameters. This is no longer just a rescue operation. You are hereby authorized to liberate any and all prisoners of the Ravager Coalition. Leave no one behind." The words sent a chill through the human teams. They understood the implications. This single rescue had become the opening move in something far larger, the complete dismantling of an entire system of oppression. Back in the command center, Warlord Grix found himself facing a nightmare beyond his comprehension. His entire garrison had vanished, his prisoners were gone, and his supposedly secure station was now under complete human control. Emergency bulkheads sealed, life support systems fluctuated, and even the artificial gravity began shifting in ways that seemed designed to disorient and terrify. "Sir," his last remaining officer reported, voice shaking with fear, "we're detecting massive energy signatures throughout the station. The humans aren't just rescuing prisoners. They're taking everything. Through the command center's viewports, Grix could see human ships positioned around Harmony's Rest. Not warships preparing for battle, but transport vessels preparing for the largest evacuation in galactic history. Somehow, humanity had transformed a hostage situation into a liberation operation that would empty entire sectors of the Ravager Empire. The children who had been taken to break human resolve were instead becoming the catalyst for the Coalition's complete destruction. As Captain Bell led the last group of freed prisoners toward the evacuation ships, she paused to look back at Harmony's Rest Station. The facility that had been a symbol of peaceful cooperation, then a site of terror and captivity, would soon be something else entirely. A monument to what happened when humanity's protective instincts were fully awakened. The children were safe, but their rescue had unleashed something that would reshape the galaxy forever. The Ravager Coalition's reign of terror was ending, one liberated world at a time. The final assault on the Ravager homeworld began at dawn on the planet's largest continent, though the inhabitants would never see another sunrise. Human ships appeared in orbit without warning, their arrival so sudden and complete that planetary defenses had no time to respond. The massive fortress world that had been the Coalition's seat of power for 3 centuries found itself surrounded by technology it could barely comprehend. Supreme Commander Vorth stood in his command bunker deep beneath the planet's surface, watching displays that showed the impossible. 3,000 human vessels hung in perfect formation above his world, but they were not firing. They were not even targeting his defensive installations. They were simply there, waiting with the patience of predators who knew their prey could not escape. "Status report," Vorth demanded, though his voice lacked its usual authority. His aide, a young officer whose species had joined the Coalition through conquest rather than choice, consulted multiple displays. "All orbital platforms are offline. Ground-based weapons show power failures across all systems. Even our communication arrays are being selectively jammed." The precision was terrifying. The humans were not destroying Ravager defenses. They were simply making them irrelevant. Every weapon system, every shield generator, every sensor array had been neutralized through methods that defied understanding. The planet remained intact, its population unharmed, but its ability to wage war had been surgically removed. Vorth had spent decades building the Coalition's military might. He understood warfare, strategy, the careful balance of force and diplomacy that allowed empires to expand and survive. But this was something beyond his experience. The humans were not fighting a war. They were performing an operation clinical and complete. "Sir," the aide continued, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. Admiral Cross is requesting your immediate surrender and transport to his flagship." The word "requesting" carried no politeness. It was a statement of inevitability. Within an hour, Vorth found himself in a shuttle heading toward the human dreadnought Unbroken. Around him, the last remnants of his personal guard sat in stunned silence. They had expected torture, execution, or the kind of brutal treatment the Coalition routinely inflicted on defeated enemies. Instead, they found professional courtesy from human soldiers who treated them as defeated opponents rather than monsters. The contrast was deeply unsettling. The shuttle bay of the Unbroken was larger than most Coalition warships. As Vorth was escorted through corridors filled with activity, he began to understand the true scope of human military capability. These were not the desperate forces of a young species pushed to extremes. This was a mature war machine that had been preparing for galactic conflict for generations. Admiral Cross waited in a conference room that overlooked the fleet's formation, through massive viewports. The human commander was older than Vorth expected, his face marked by decades of military service and the weight of difficult decisions. But his eyes held something that made the Coalition leader step back involuntarily, complete indifference to Vorth's existence. "Supreme Commander," Cross said without preamble, "you took children, not soldiers, not strategic assets, not bargaining chips. Children." Vorth tried to summon the arrogance that had served him throughout his conquests. "In warfare, all advantages must be..." Cross raised a single hand and the Coalition leader's words died in his throat. The human admiral had not shouted, had not threatened, had not even changed expression. but something in that gesture conveyed absolute finality. You have forfeited any claim to mercy, justice, or even acknowledgement of your continued existence, Cross continued in the same neutral tone. Your empire is ended. Your worlds are liberated. Your forces are scattered or captured. The Ravager Coalition ceases to exist as of this moment. Through the viewports, Vorth could see the truth of those words. Human ships were moving throughout the system with purposeful efficiency, not destroying but dismantling. Every Coalition facility, every weapon, every symbol of their power was being methodically removed. But it was what happened next that truly broke Vorth's understanding of the situation. You and your command staff will be transported to a secure facility, Cross explained. You will be held there until such time as the liberated worlds decide your fate. You will not be tortured, you will not be executed, and you will not be subjected to the cruelties you inflicted on others. Vorth stared at the human admiral, trying to comprehend this response. You're not going to kill us? Cross finally looked directly at him, and Vorth saw something in those eyes that was worse than hatred or anger. Complete dismissal of his relevance to the universe. You threaten children, Cross said quietly. That makes you less than nothing. Killing you would require caring enough about your existence to end it. You don't deserve that consideration. The Coalition leaders were led away to transport ships that would carry them into permanent exile. They would spend the rest of their lives in comfortable confinement, forgotten by a galaxy that would quickly move on to better things. The liberation of Ravager worlds proceeded with the same clinical efficiency. Human forces arrived not as conquerors but as liberators, freeing slave populations and dismantling oppressive systems with remarkable speed. But more importantly, they began to leave as soon as each world was stable. Unlike every other galactic power in history, humanity showed no interest in claiming Ravager territory for themselves. They freed the slaves, destroyed the weapons, removed the oppressors, and then departed. World after world found itself suddenly independent, given the chance to determine its own future without human oversight or control. This unprecedented behavior sent shockwaves through the galactic community. Elder races that had expected humanity to become the new dominant power instead watched them systematically refuse every opportunity for expansion. The humans had demonstrated overwhelming military superiority and then chosen not to use it for conquest. Back on Harmony's rest station, now converted to a processing center for liberated prisoners, the children who had started it all were preparing to return home. The facility buzzed with activity as beings from dozens of species worked together to coordinate transportation, medical care, and reunion services for families separated by Ravager cruelty. Amy found herself helping coordinate care for younger Flurian cubs whose families were still being located. Her experience during captivity had changed her, giving her a maturity beyond her 12 years. She moved through the crowded halls with quiet confidence, offering comfort and practical assistance wherever needed. Dan had become an unofficial liaison between human and alien refugees. His programming lessons transformed into communication tools that helped traumatized prisoners share their needs with rescue workers. The rhythm codes he had developed with Pip had evolved into a simple but effective universal language for basic concepts. Pip himself had grown during their ordeal. The small Flurian cub who had once fumbled with circuit boards now moved with purposeful determination. Using his species' natural empathy to identify individuals who needed extra care or attention, his bond with the human children had taught him that courage was not about size or strength, but about choosing to help others despite your own fear. Captain Reed, freed from her own captivity and restored to command of the station, watched the activities with mixed emotions. The peaceful cultural exchange that had been her life's work had been shattered by violence, but something remarkable had grown from the wreckage. The connections formed between human and alien children during their captivity were stronger than anything the original program had achieved. Captain Reed? Amy approached with Pip at her side, the two of them moving with the easy companionship of siblings. When we go home, can we keep working together? We want to help other kids who might be in trouble. Reed knelt down to their level, struck by the determination in both young faces. What did you have in mind? A network, Dan said, joining them with several other children from both species. Kids helping kids. If something like this happens again, we want to be ready. The idea was simple but profound. The children had experienced the worst that the galaxy could offer and emerged not with hatred or fear, but with an even stronger commitment to protecting others. They wanted to create a system that would ensure no child, human or alien, would face such dangers alone. Within months, the children's network had become a reality. Young people from dozens of species worked together to identify threats, coordinate responses, and provide support for victims of violence and oppression. It was funded by grateful governments and staffed by volunteers who had learned that courage was not limited by age or species. The network's first major success came when they identified a human colony that had gone silent near the galactic rim. Adult authorities were preparing a standard investigation when the children's analysis suggested something more urgent. Their recommendation for immediate military response saved 3,000 lives from a previously unknown hostile force. But the true measure of how the galaxy had changed came in the reactions of other species to humanity's demonstration of power. Instead of fear or resentment, most worlds expressed gratitude and respect. Humanity had shown that overwhelming force could be used for protection rather than conquest, that power could serve justice rather than ambition. The Galactic Council itself was transformed by the events. Elder races that had dismissed humanity as too emotional for galactic leadership found themselves requesting human advice on military matters, conflict resolution, and the protection of vulnerable populations. The species that had once been considered too young for serious responsibility had become the guardians others turned to in times of crisis. Years later, Amy stood in the same observation deck where Reed had once watched children and cubs learning together. Now a young woman serving as director of the Children's Network, she oversaw programs that spanned the galaxy. Beside her, Pip had grown into a respected diplomat whose unique perspective on both conflict and cooperation made him invaluable in negotiating peaceful solutions to disputes. "Do you ever think about that day?" Pip asked, his English now flawless, after years of practice. "When the Ravagers came?" Amy nodded slowly. "Every day. It changed everything." "For the better?" She considered the question carefully, watching human and alien children working together in the halls below. The galaxy was safer now, not because humanity had conquered its threats, but because they had shown that protection was possible, that the strong could choose to defend the weak rather than exploit them. "Yes," she said finally. "For the better." Deep in space, Admiral Cross received reports from across human territory. The fleets were returning to their bases, the hidden assets were going back into storage, and the galaxy was settling into a new equilibrium. But everyone understood that things had fundamentally changed. Humanity had revealed its true capabilities and then chosen restraint over domination. They had demonstrated that their emotional attachments, rather than being weaknesses, were the source of strength that other species could rely upon. The cubs had been taken hostage, and humanity's response had indeed trembled the galaxy. But not with fear. With hope for a future where the innocent would never stand unprotected again. The children were safe. The galaxy was better. And everyone understood that some lines once drawn would never be crossed again.